Now, again, it's great to be able to have everybody come back, and what I'm going to do is set off a little bit today talking about some of the sow research we've done and some of the precision feeding work we've done both in sows and in grow-finish diets. But before I start, I really want to send some acknowledgments out to some of the people that really help us out on a daily and hourly basis that oftentimes are behind the scenes and you don't get a lot of recognition. But for those that have been through the K-State program, you recognize Mark Nelson right here. He's been a staple for a lot of years. And whether we wanted to get rid of him or not, I don't know if we could, but he's, I think, been through the system and with us, well, basically since an undergrad. He does a tremendous job leading our swine unit out there and has a great support staff. Dwayne Bauman is also right here. Dwayne's a tremendous individual that helps us out a lot. And so while his core responsibilities are focused in the breeding barn and gestation barn, you can see him in front of the feed logic. And there's a reason that he's in front of the feed logic right there. And he does a great job of just making sure we keep operational. We're really lucky this year also to have a new full-time person join us. Wesley Atkinson is here on the right in that top picture. Wesley is an individual that came through the state right here and was looking for an opportunity earlier this fall. And we had one of our previous full-time persons, Frank Jennings, retire. And Wesley was interested in coming and seeing what it was like in the swine industry. And Wesley had no pig experience before he started working with us at the swine unit. And kind of similar to what Joel said, the importance of having our units this close to campus to be able to open our doors and get people exposed to the industry is tremendous, but also having the opportunity to have other people that are potential full-time employees for us to be able to come in and experience what we do. He's doing a great job. We hope we can keep him around. But having those chances to be able to invite people in, get them in your barns, hopefully generate employment is a great deal, which falls on then with the four that I have on the bottom and Brandon here on top, all undergraduate employees at the swine unit. And they do a tremendous job for us. And yes, even though we say our grad students have the crappiest jobs when they're collecting fecal samples, these guys have the real crappiest jobs, right? They've got the power washers in hand and they're the ones cleaning up the barns after we leave and leave everything a mess. And so it's really a great job, a great team that we have right there. I've got the faculty responsibility oversight right there, and these folks make my job easy. So they really do a good job for us and help us with our research program. A couple other people I want to acknowledge. Again, for those that have been through the K-State program, you'll recognize Teresa right here. Teresa's been in our swine lab and does a tremendous job with everything we do from an analytical standpoint. It's not a surprise that you've never seen Joel DeRushi in a white lab coat. It's not. I have seen him in an Iowa State Cyclone t-shirt, but we'll talk about that later on. But Teresa's the one that really shores everything up for us. Teresa's involved a lot with showing some of her dogs. This is the one that I'm fond of very much so. Woody right here is her dog that she's able to put through. And so a great group right there. Also at the feed mill, we mentioned it earlier and Chad Polk gave acknowledgments, but what Christian and Haley doing for us on a daily basis out there, you know, I'd love to tell them that we always give them the 2 weeks notice that they want before we go and try and make diets and make changes to our formulations, but that would be a lie, okay? So we are lucky that they're willing and able to help us out when we're behind the ball on our side, and it's really been a really nice addition back to our program to have that mill functional and being able to produce research diets right there. And so great group that we have here at K-State, and a lot of the people that you don't see up here in the front of the stage are really what makes this program go. So we're going to switch in a little bit and talk data for a little bit right now. And so this is a trial that we conducted that Abigail Jenkins just conducted for us. It was a continuation of some research we'd done with Filio, looking at some of their yeast products and diets. And so in this particular trial, we had a group of sows that were fed a control diet and a diet with Actisaf. Their piglets, their subsequent progeny, were weaned into the nursery on control diets for another yeast product. And we didn't see any differences in lactation performance from feeding the sows the Actisaf. However, once we got into the nursery, this is the overall nursery period average daily gain. We did end up seeing an interaction when there was not Actisaf in the sow diet. We did see a tendency for an increase in average daily gain with their nursery yeast product. However, more importantly, once we saw the Actisaf, or once we added the Actisaf in the lactation diets, we saw the performance of their offspring increase in that nursery period. And if you've been here for the last handful of years, this isn't the first time you've seen this type of a data as well, too. I think this is the third trial, if I remember right, Joel, where we fed Actisaf to sows and saw performance of their offspring increased in the nursery phase. And so definitely something that looks to be passing through there and have an influence from that sow to those pigs. Again, this was only lactation period, so this was a transfer of some mechanism that allowed them to grow faster in the nursery from only supplementing the Actisaf in lactation. What was interesting about this was that we actually were able to follow these pigs through till finishing, and the same type of a scenario occurred where we tended to have an increase in final body weight of those piglets from sows that were fed Actisaf. And so if you look at this right here, you know, roughly 7 pounds or so of additional final body weight from the offspring of sows that were fed Actisaf. A yeast product being fed during lactation, having this type of an impact on those piglets when they're pushing out the door is something that we should be definitely taking note. I'm not quite sure if there's much other subsequent data with this product going all the way to finishing, but something that is definitely interesting for us to be able to consider the value of those additional pounds right there. Within this trial, we also had the opportunity to look at some of the impact of these yeast products on immune function. This slide right here shows the PCV2 S to P ratio, and basically what that means is the titer level from the vaccine is maintained for a longer period of time in the offspring that were from sows fed the Actisaf. And so this is a good thing. In this particular slide, we want a higher line right there. It shows that there's a continuation of the activity of that porcine, that PCV2 vaccine as it's going through in the offspring. And so again, we have a number of other immune function parameters that I couldn't show from a sense of time today, but definitely something here from just feeding sows, yeast products, and the subsequent influence on offspring performance. I want to talk about another trial that we did. We were really fortunate to work with JBS and Kyle Coble and his group down in Dalhart, and Ray Farrell spent a whole summer down there, and it's always interested in me. We have a lot of people wanting to raise their hand and want to do summer sow trials, and I always think to myself, why in the world are you going to do that? Because it's not that much fun. It's long hours and long days, but Rafe did a really nice job for us. This was a product that we tested that actually came out of a group Agri-Series down in Brazil, and it's a product called Flavolac. Basically, it's a blend of active ingredients. Had about 271 sows on the trial with a control diet supplemented with this Flavolac product. And so what we saw, this is a supplementation only during lactation. We saw an increase in the number of pigs weaned, not statistical. However, it did result into a tendency for a reduction in pre-wean mortality once that Flavolac was added in those diets fed to the sows. We also saw an increase in litter weight that tended to be increased, resulting in about 3/10 of an increase in weaning weight on an individual pig basis. And what was interesting on this one right here is that we've been interacting with this Agri-Series group. This was the 12th study that they've done with Flavolac within the system. First one in the United States, the rest of them down in Brazil. But the results that we saw right here were absolutely just like what they saw down in Brazil. And so if you look at a meta-analysis, we were falling right in line with the expected performance differences obtained with this Flavolac product. And so something, again, from a feed additive perspective in sows, maybe something to consider going forward for your productivity. Going to switch gears now away from feed additives, look at more feeding strategies. And Michaela Spindler's done a really nice job for us looking at some precision feeding. And this is something that's really becoming more popular of a topic for us to consider. And a lot of that because of the feeding technologies that are out there. And this is a picture of our swine farm at K-State, our new Farron house, the Just-All units up on top. You know, if it wasn't for the feeding units like the Just-All, we couldn't be able to accomplish trials like this with individually fed sows. And we're seeing a lot of these types of systems out in commercial barns right now, but the focus on feeding the individual sow versus the whole barn, allowing us to more dial in really what we want to be able to put in front of those sows to help maximize performance. And so in this particular trial right here, we actually formulated 2 different diets. A very low lysine diet, a 0.25 SID lysine, and it is possible to actually get a 0.25 SID lysine, but you have to work at that pretty hard. We had a normal kind of a 1.1 SID lysine, and then we blended those 2 diets to form treatments to hit a target SID lysine intake on a daily basis. In this first trial, what we did is we used two different curves, a curve established by the NRC and one from INRA out of France. But in order to try and hit those targets, we actually adjusted our feeding levels and the blend of those two diets every third day, which if you ask Michaela becomes a heck of a chore, trying to chase in front of these sows. We only had 32 sows in front of us right here, but it still ends up being quite a bit of effort to do that. And so to kind of put this in perspective, the purple line right here was what our assumed feed intake would be for a gilt with 14 pigs. And so our control diet, when you feed a single level of lysine at that 1.10% SID lysine, these blue bars would indicate the amount of SID lysine on a grams per day basis that sow is consuming. And so you can see that mirrors their changes in feed intake because we're setting a static level of SID lysine in the diet. However, both the NRC in the red on this particular slide and the green in the INRA sets curves of what they think the SID lysine the sow should consume to meet their requirements on a daily basis, all based on milk production, right? And so you see those levels increasing, but you see the shape of these curves different for NRC versus the INRA models. We start going into the data. Again, the control diet in the blue, the NRC in the red, the INRA model in the green. Did not see any change in sow body weight change from entry to wean or back fat change. Did not see any change in average daily feed intake like we expected, but because of how we fluctuated the SID lysine concentration that was in front of those sows on a daily basis, we did obtain the levels of SID lysine intake on average over the whole lactation period as we were targeting. So we expected to see a much higher lysine intake on the controls because they were fed much higher lysine throughout the course of that lactation period compared to the others that were fed on a curve. And so, most people, you have in mind a 60-ish, a 65-ish grams per day type of a level. Definitely based on what the NRC thinks we should be feeding for these sows as well as INRA. Much lower levels of SID lysine. And what that did is it correlated then to lower litter weaning performance. And so we had lower litter weaning weights, even though we had basically the same number of piglets that were weaned on each of these three treatments. Lower litter weaning weights, lower piglet weaning weights based on less lysine being provided to those sows, less milk production, less litter or less piglet growth right there. And so maybe nothing too surprising, but it did help us reinforce that the models that the NRC is suggesting we should have for our nutrient requirement based on lysine and lactation are probably well under where they should be in order to be able to maximize litter weaning weight. One of the things that we're also doing right here is starting to look at this on an efficiency standpoint. And so this is grams of SID lysine per pound of litter weight gain. As you'd expect, we had lower lysine going in. We dropped the efficiency right here, if you will. But just like in feed efficiency and grow finish or nursery, you got to be careful. So yeah, you want to think that the lower number is better, but not always the case, because what we did is we drove down performance with those lower levels. And so if you're only chasing lysine efficiency on a litter weight basis, it'll drive you to a lower performing scenario to be able to lower that. But on the other hand, it does make you wonder how much excess lysine are we feeding on the control side? Are there opportunities to be able to adjust maybe how we're feeding sows to be more efficient on our nutrients that we're putting in? That did show up as we started looking at nitrogen balance on these animals. This is a modeled balance when you start looking at nitrogen ingested, which makes sense when you have the control sows fed a higher level of SID lysine, lower levels in the NRC and the INRA. But when you start looking at an excretion standpoint, this is something that's going to be a lot more interesting to us in the future as we all start talking about LCA. We start talking about nutrient balance. The nitrogen excretion on these sows on the NRC and INRA was much lower. It kind of surprised me, the control sow, modeled anyways, excreting 66% of the nitrogen that she was consuming. And when I'm sitting there and thinking about that as being over half of what she's consuming, I'm like, boy, are we really doing the right things with how we're feeding those sows? It's opportunities maybe to be chasing some of this in the future as we start looking at some of this sustainability, LCA types of effects. After that trial, Michaela said, wow, it looks like NRC is much lower than what we should expect. And so most people are feeding around the 60 grams. So let's use the NRC curve, but bump up the lysine target by about 20%. Try and get about 60 grams of lysine in these sows on average during lactation. But we also looked at it in two different ways. We set the curves based on day one of lactation, based on litter size and parity, and left those curves static. or we went in and dynamically changed those. So every third day we went and adjusted those curves to match her specific feed intake and make sure she's really trying to hit that lysine intake we were hoping to have her consume. And so the benefit here would be that when you go into commercial farms, if you can set one curve on day one and not have to worry about it anymore, it's a heck of a lot easier than if you're chasing each of these sows all through the time, especially after a lot of sows in lactation. But in this particular trial, again, shooting for those orange curves to be about 60 grams of lysine intake. Didn't see any change in body weight or back fat between entry and weaning. Saw no change in average daily feed intake. SID lysine intake was reduced in both the static and the dynamic curves like we expected. We expected to see a less than the control. We hit pretty much the target we were looking for at 60 grams. We also noticed that the static curve resulted in similar performance as the dynamic. So maybe going and changing those curves extremely frequently will not be needed once we get into these systems and figuring out how to implement this in the farm. Did not end up seeing a significant change in litter weaning weight, even though we got 5 pounds of difference right there. Partly that's a function of the number of sows that we have on this trial. Definitely 5 pounds is meaningful for most people, but 0.2 of a pound in piglet weaning weight, that was not different across treatments right here. And so it sure looks like approaching that 60 grams per day was able to maximize litter weaning weight or piglet weaning weight. And when you start looking at this, the efficiency of lysine utilization on a litter weight basis, it makes you wonder then, is this inefficiency of the control when it didn't yield any additional litter weight gain, something that we need to dial in more when we start looking at feeding sows into the future. And so opportunities right here to use a more dynamic, more targeted feeding strategy with our sows during lactation, and really only possible with some of the technologies we have in there to be able to get feed in front of the sows. Same story when you start looking at nitrogen ingested versus nitrogen excretion. Lower the amount of excretion on those blend or those precision fed diets compared to that control diet. Again, that's something that we're wanting to do, is be able to minimize the amount of excretion of these nutrients that we need to be able to promote performance. And so definitely things go in the right direction, especially when we start thinking about sustainability and LCA in the future. After that happened, Michaela then said, we need more sows. And so called Hyatt and said, where's a location that we can get in and get some of this done with some of those just all feeders, and put us in contact with Brenneman's. And Brenneman said, absolutely, come on up and let's give this a shout. And so Michaela spent the whole summer up there, and we're really happy to work with the Brenneman's group. They did a really nice job working with us. Michaela had a good group up there. I know Vitor, one of the employees from PIC, was on farm there, and Michaela's right-hand man, at that point too. And so there's a lot of long days, a lot of data collection right there on these sows. In this particular trial, we fed a low lysine, which we could accomplish with a 0.6 SID lysine compared to their 107. Went back and we used the NRC shape of the curve as our target, increased that by about 20% to try and target lysine intake on these animals. Michaela went in and adjusted based on day 7 and 14 the curves to try and match what we were looking at. That was doable when you start thinking about 728 sows that she had on test right here. Doable, but still almost to push into the extreme of how much effort you can put in and how much emphasis you need to have in that area. But when we start looking at this, I didn't see any change in sow body weight or back fat from entry to weaning. Did not see any change in average daily feed intake. However, the observed average daily feed intake we had in this trial was lower than anticipated based on farm history right there. And so consequently, when you start looking at SID lysine on a daily basis on average, we only hit about 55 grams on the blend diet right here. We were hoping that to be 61-ish, and because of the lower over-farm feed intake, we weren't able to hit that. That'll be important as we start looking at some of these other slides. And so this chart looks at litter weaning weight. On the left right here, I have all of the sows represented where we had a tendency for a reduction in litter weaning weight with the blend, but also if you think back, it was a 55 grams of lysine intake. When you go back and sort out only those sows that had 61 grams or greater, we end up having no difference in litter weaning right there, about 4 pounds on a numerical standpoint, actually higher from blending those treatments. We start looking at on an average daily gain basis, a tendency for lower average daily gain with all sows, no difference, but when we had 61 grams per day. And so interesting right here, and especially as we start looking maybe at the efficiency levels, if you look at the growth performance of these litters, sitting at on an average basis about 0.35 average daily gain on a piglet perspective, it's quite low. And so this is P0 and P1 sows probably behind all this. Brenneman's also loads their sows up with quite a few pigs, and so that could be contributing to some of that. But when you start looking at these efficiencies, they're much higher than what we saw at the K-State farm, partly because we don't have as much litter weight that's going through. But still that representation right there is that we can get a more efficient lysine utilization through these blending trials, whether it be on an all-sow basis or whether it be for only those sows with 61 grams per day or above from a lysine level. And so something again to dial in as we keep on going forward with where this is going to go. And so transitioning now, so precision feeding sows. Now we're going to talk about precision feeding grow finished pigs. And Hyatt, I've mentioned your name a couple of times. Here's a trial that was very similar to one that Hyatt conducted when he was in grad school with us here. We had a grow finish trial where we had a typical phase feeding program that we utilized, or we used the feed logic to blend those diets, basically achieving a target nutrient composition on a daily basis throughout the grow finish phase. And so what we did is we made two different diets, a low nutrient dense diet, a high nutrient dense diet, and blended those for the diet blending. We also formulated two treatments at a 90% of NRC, the PIC lysine requirements and 100% of the lysine requirements. It was interesting on this one, we did not end up seeing any difference in growth performance from the differences in relationship of lysine to what the PIC requirement was. And so already that would suggest that maybe that 90% was good enough to be able to maximize the performance in these pigs. Didn't see any difference in average daily gain. However, did see a reduction or an improvement in feed efficiency when we had the diet blending, so no difference in gain. Why the animals on these blending treatments tend to eat less, we're not 100% sure. Hyatt saw the same thing. It translates into this improvement in feed efficiency right here. What that does then, when you look at it in an economics perspective, this slide right here is the economics calculated with what we term as a high feed price scenario. Unfortunately, that high price scenario is kind of what we're dealing with right now. And so when you start looking at this, we did see a change in feed cost per pig. When you feed a higher, more nutrient-dense diet, the feed cost per pig is definitely higher right there. No change in feed cost per pig from a phase feeding versus a diet blending. No statistical difference from income over feed cost right here, but lower numerical numbers with the diet blending here. The interesting part about this is if you go and look at this on a low feed cost perspective, a low revenue perspective, actually what you get into is increase in feed costs for those pigs on the diet blending scenario. And at first you're like, well, what's going on right there? We're targeting their nutrition, on a daily basis. But the reality is when you only feed two diets and you're forced to blend those two diets, you overfeed nutrients during different days and different portions of that grow finish period. And so it's something that if we want to start getting more precise on how we're going to put feed in front of pigs, using a model with only two diets, which logistically makes a lot of sense for the feed mill and far as for getting feed to the farm, may not be the best thing from an economical standpoint if we're overfeeding nutrients because we don't have the flexibility to adjust it like we do in a phase feeding program. Going to transition right now over to the next speakers, and really had a great opportunity for the last number of years to spend a lot of time in the feed biosecurity, feed safety area. It's been a great opportunity to have Jamil and Olivia helping with us as well too. And these pictures right here are from the Swine Health Improvement Plan meetings that we had back in September up in Minnesota. They've done a tremendous job of helping lead and helping provide some of the guidance for the feed biosafety group right there. Jordan's taken the main lead. I appreciate everything Jordan's been doing right there. Quite honestly, it's like herding cats some days when you start talking about feed safety and biosecurity, partly because this has really brought to light what little we know about the feed logistics and ingredient procurement and all of those coming through. But